We will start session number 3 with Father Dariusz Dańkowski from Jesuit University Ignatianum in Krakow, a Jesuit. And Father Dariusz will speak about discerned justice and discursive justice in dialogue. So now Father is with us on site, and we will have a lecture, and then we will have questions from the people on site, from WebEx participants, and from the streams. Okay, Father, the floor is yours.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me? Okay, so there's a contact. So my name is Dariusz Dańkowski. I am a Catholic priest, as you can see. I belong to the South Poland Jesuit province. I do teach philosophy, social philosophy, and Catholic social teaching at the Jesuit University Ignatianum here in Krakow, in the place of this conference. The goal of my presentation is to present the idea of discerned justice, which is the model of justice rooted in the spirituality and pedagogy of Saint Ignatius Loyola, the 16th century founder of the Jesuits. Probably you never heard before this term, the discerned justice. I will try first briefly explain what is the meaning of this term. And next, I want to examine the legitimacy of this kind of justice in public debate within a constitutional democracy. Therefore, I will refer to the conception of public reason by John Rawls, to the ethics of discourse by Jürgen Habermas. Is my speaking okay? Everything works. Okay, so let's go to the first point, discerned justice. The pastoral documents of the Society of Jesus, the Jesuit order, do not offer any specific theory nor conception of social justice. However, Ignatian spirituality and pedagogy, when combined with the principles of the Catholic social teaching and the practice of recognizing the signs of time, introduced by Vaticanum Secundum, make room for creation of a module of discerned justice. Briefly speaking, discerned justice is the concretization of the ideal of social justice presented in the Catholic social teaching. Discerned justice is the set of general principles, maxims, and judgments directed to respect rights of individuals and social groups and to strengthen the participation in the common good, based on the spirituality and pedagogy of Saint Ignatius Loyola, on the principles of the Catholic social teaching, and on the deciphered signs of time in the meaning of Vaticanum Secundum. So there are 5 analytic elements which structure this module of justice. 3 substantial elements, like apostolic priorities of the Society of Jesus, the principles of the Catholic social teaching, like the common good, solidarity, subsidiarity, personal dignity, family, preferential option for the poor, ecology, and third, the deciphered signs of time. And there are also 2 quasi-procedural elements of this module, the method of Ignatian pedagogy, which includes 5 domains: context, experience, reflection, action, evaluation, and second, the rules of Ignatian discernment. Jesuit pastoral documents do not offer academic definition of social justice. Nevertheless, they present various significant aspects of justice and the most blatant examples of injustice in contemporary world. Among those aspects, they point the problem of poverty, oppression, violence, abandonment, human rights, racism, ecology, preferential option for the poor. While none of these ideas are unique to Jesuit thinking, application of these ideas is distinctively Jesuit. And now we go to the discernment, the process of discernment. As Father James Martin puts it, for the Jesuit, discernment means something more than wise judgment and the ability to choose carefully. It is the heart of prayerful decision-making that uses specific spiritual practices. The Jesuit tradition of discernment is rooted in the spiritual exercises, the classic manual on prayer written by Saint Ignatius Loyola. Discernment for Saint Ignatius means being aware that God wants us to make good decisions, that God will help us make good decisions, but that we are often moved by competing forces, ones that pull us toward God and ones that push us away. We feel, for example, pushed and pulled by a variety of inner forces, selfish versus generous motives, free versus unfree motives, and healthy versus unhealthy motives. So discernment is the ability to see clearly what those forces are, to be able to identify, weigh, and judge them, and finally to choose the path most in line with God's desires for you and for the world. It takes into account the richness and complexity of a person's life, and most importantly, assumes that God is active in the decision-making process. As Ignatius says, the Creator deals with the creature directly. How does one discern? There are many practices and methods outlined in the spiritual exercises. Let me highlight some general ones. First, you try to be indifferent, that is free of anything keeping you from following God's desires. For example, if you are discerning whether or not to visit a sick friend in the hospital and you are overly worried about getting sick, you are not free. Something is preventing you from doing a good thing. Indifferent does not mean that you don't care, but that you are free to follow God's desires. Second, you ask for God's help. Discernment is not done on your own. You need God's help to choose the right path. You also need to reflect on the gospel and church teaching as a way of starting with a good foundation. That is, you would never discern if you should murder someone. All this is done in the context of prayer. But the intellect is fully engaged as well, and this is an important point. Third, you weigh the various movements within oneself to see which may be coming from God and which may be not. For someone progressing in the spiritual life, says St. Ignatius, the good spirit will bring support, encouragement, and peace of mind. Think of someone who decides to forgive another person and who feels a sense of calm consolation when they think about it. The opposite is true of the evil spirit. That spirit causes gnawing anxiety and throws up false obstacles, designed to impede one's spiritual progress. Usually this manifests as the voice of selfishness. In the case of the person seeking to forgive another, the evil spirit will say, if you forgive, people will see you as a doormat. Interestingly, says Ignatius, for the person going the opposite way, from good to bad, things are reversed. The good spirit is not encouraging, but instead wakes you up with a start. That's the sting of conscience. The evil spirit, by contrast, is encouraging of bad behavior. Don't worry, keep stealing from your company. Everyone does it. Go on. The person who is experienced in discernment soon becomes adept at identifying these often subtle movements of one's heart. Fourth, if there is no clear answer, you can rely on other practices, each suggested by St. Ignatius. You could imagine someone in the same situation you are and think about what advice you would give him or her that can help lessen the influence of our own selfish desires in the discernment. Or imagine what you would want to tell Jesus at the Last Judgment. That doesn't work for every decision, but particularly for complex ethical decisions, it can be clarifying. Or think of how you would judge your decision on your deathbed, so in the last minute of your life. This helps prioritizing what is more important in your life. There are more rules. I skip some of them because of the shortage of time. This module offers a unique kind of balance between the general principles of justice and equity, traditional epikeia in the Aristotelian sense, which is also translated sometimes as reasonableness, restrictive interpretation of positive law based on the benign will of the legislator who would not want to bind his subjects in certain circumstances. The process of discernment is both intellectual and spiritual. The question is, can we express its conclusions in public and universal terms, just in the public debate as it happens in the society? Let's analyze the case of Catholic parish activists who advocate welcoming of refugees in the town, putting the burdens on the whole local community. They are motivated by the commandment of Christ's love. Christopher Eberle speaks about the overridingness of religious obligation, meaning by this that the obligation to obey God is the most important obligation for religious people, such that in case of conflict between that obligation and some other, they must opt in favor of obedience to God. Discerned justice can mitigate this tension by creation a unique balance between general principles and commands and equity, epikeia, in particular context. And now how we can see this kind of the process of discernment and the discerned justice in the public debate from the perspective of deliberative democracy. I want to briefly reflect to the public reason of John Rawls and discourse ethics of Habermas. John Rawls presents his revised version of the proviso of public reason as follows. The first aspect of public political culture is that reasonable, comprehensive doctrines, religious or non-religious, may be introduced in public political discussion at any time, provided that in due course proper political reasons, and not reasons given solely by comprehensive doctrines, are presented that are sufficient to support whatever the comprehensive doctrines introduced are said to support. According to this conception, religious truth has to be translated into political values. People arguing from religious premises to political conclusions should sincerely believe that other people might reasonably be expected to endorse their reasons from their own points of view. Citizens are not required to accept one another's conclusions because reasonable people may disagree about what is the most reasonable combination in any particular case. For the public, political culture is bound to contain different fundamental ideas that can be developed in different ways. This was quotation from Political Liberalism. Rawls believes that political liberalism treats both religious and secular doctrines in the same way. Reasonable people might order political values in various ways and come to various conclusions. Those who oppose abortion because of religious convictions should be ready, firstly, to present their background, and secondly, to present their view using political values and reasonable way of ordering them. These values are respect for human life, respect for women's rights, and the ideal of social procreation. And the same works both for those who oppose abortion and those who are pro-choice. Similarly, those who advocate a welcoming of refugees because of religious convictions should be ready to present political values, human rights, solidarity, global peace, humanitarian arguments. The religious genesis of political convictions does not violate the principle of reciprocity. Those who advocate welcoming refugees in their town can still engage public reason at any time, as long as they refer to fundamental ideas that are themselves seen as implicit in the public political culture. And now I go to Habermas. I skip the introduction. Habermas proposes an institutional translation proviso, according to which religious citizens should be allowed to express and justify their convictions in a religious language if they cannot find secular translations for them. Habermas holds that religious citizens in such cases do not have to replace their religious arguments with secular arguments, though they should enter into the process of translation. So they should speak in open way from their religious perspective, counting that everybody will participate in this translation process. Religious citizens can fully express their comprehensive views under the condition that they recognize the institutional translation proviso and trusting that their fellow citizens will cooperate for accomplishing a translation. Of course, there is a risk that religious voices will remain untranslated, which happens. But this should not discourage religious citizens because their statements are important, both for their own participation in the public life and for other people in the learning process. Nevertheless, this expression of religious views has structural limitations. In the end, laws will still have to be passed on the basis of secular reasons. And this is the difference comparing with John Rawls' conception. Habermas declares that there is a need for a filter, such as will translate a wide political speech into more formal language of the kind that allows only secular contributions to pass through. The parliamentary rules must empower the House leader to have religious statements or justification expunged from the minutes, from the agenda of the floor. In Habermas' proposal, a state law would never be based on religious reasons alone. Religious arguments can only become a part of coercive law if the necessary translation already occurs in the pre-parliamentarian domain. Concluding, Habermas' proviso seems at first glance to be more inclusive and more open to religion than Rawls' one. Religious activists advocating welcoming of the refugees in their neighborhood might be, however, misled. In Habermasian model, citizens are aware of the institutional filter, which sets a condition on the legislative process and obviously affects the learning process. Nevertheless, in Habermas' view, all citizens can be expected not to deny from the outset any possible cognitive substance to these religious contributions. This might sound very promising for religious citizens. However, this might be often ineffective, counterintuitive, and highly contingent in reality. Citizens make this effort despite the priority that secular reasons enjoy in the political arena. Thus, the success of the Habermasian model rests very much upon a voluntary acceptance of the learning process by citizens. So, coming to the very conclusions, both Rawls and Habermas stress the value of achieving stability for the right reasons, of achieving integration via constitutional values, and of reciprocity of expectations among citizens. The translation proviso cannot work fully if it is not accompanied by the requisite changes in mentality, which makes the whole conception counterintuitive and highly idealistic. I argue that the module of discerned justice can satisfy the proviso of public reason, according to John Rawls, while at the same time the satisfying of the Habermas institutional translation proviso might be more complicated. Even though Habermas tries to offset the asymmetry between religious and secular statements, it's still very contingent and can be not fair in certain cultures, even in highly developed democratic society. The model of discerned justice offers a way of learning process in a more complex sense, including spiritual, pastoral, and educational perspective. For example, this model brings new values to public debate like pride, humiliation, forgiveness, atonement, repentance. Discerned justice goes beyond ethical and juridical analysis. It is open for spirituality, economy of superflux or superabundance, for example, introduced by Ricoeur, integration of experience and action into reflection. The deciphered signs of time receive a sort of gravity power. They are the source of consolation. Communal discernment presumes listening to the voices of all those who are affected by the subject of discernment. Naming of the signs of time allows for the inclusive language and referring to the cross-cultural values. At the same time, stressing the spiritual experience might be a sort of exclusive approach. and conversation about this experience is the matter of further dialogue and further discernment. Thank you very much for your attention. I can see the signs of Mr. Speaker, so I will be very grateful for your comments, for your questions, for your statements.
Thank you for your presentation. I was very interested by this question, how to discern which among our decisions comes from God and which do not. This question interests me personally at this moment because when I was going to Krakow, my flight was cancelled, and there were colleagues, parents, relatives, friends who were saying that probably God doesn't want that you go to Krakow. And I found another solution. I found tickets for bus and a combination of trains. And I came here. But according to the teaching of Ignatius Loyola, what could justify my decision to come here?
Okay, thank you.
And another question related to this question. Now we have COVID-19 infection, and this infection, in your not in your opinion, but according to the teaching of Ignatius Loyola, how to interpret correctly, from his point of view, the reason why we have this infection. Probably God wanted people to wanted to teach people something important, and wanted to change their mode of life, or not, or it's just a punishment.
Thank you very much for these questions. Merci beaucoup. First question is a very deep question, and people spend sometimes the whole life to answer this question. What comes from God? What comes from not from God? From evil spirit? According to Ignatian spirituality, there are some signs of confirmation that I'm following God's path. For example, my inner peace, feeling of peace in my heart. Next, good relationship with all my friends and family. People who are spiritually balanced, usually they get alone with people around them. Yes. Also, if I keep consistency in my choices, I'm not changing the most important choices of my life from Monday to Tuesday, from Tuesday to Wednesday. If I am a balanced person, consistent with my personal choices, this is another confirmation that I'm following the right path. But also in Ignatian spirituality, what is recommended is the spiritual guidance, to have a spiritual director who can talk with me and can objectivize my movement of my heart, of my soul. Speaking about COVID, I think St. Ignatius Loyola would skip partially this answer and would say, this is God's mystery, this is a providence, and we cannot judge it. However, he would be more talkative in terms of freedom. Am I free to visit my sick friend under the circumstances of COVID? Of course not. COVID changed our sense of freedom and our fears, because we have to respect the facts. This is such a dangerous pandemic that.
Excuse me, but I did visit my sick friend, Robert Gillish. We could speak on WhatsApp, and I was looking at him through the window.
Okay.
So we can find something.
This was the specification of these questions. But as I said at the beginning, the confirmation comes both from our heart and a relationship with the world. Okay.
Thank you very much.
So I'm ready for other questions. I press mute. Yeah.
Okay. Now we can move to the questions on WebEx. One or two questions. I can see that we have questions on YouTube stream also. So one or two questions. The quick one, please, to Father Dariusz on this concept of social justice. Is it social justice? Discerned justice. Okay. Alex, I can see raising hand, just please unmute yourself and ask the question.
So Father, what I found a really interesting connection with the Rolls and Habermas is that normally when we think of religious reasons, we're thinking of ones that are statable in language, and that at least if not public, they are sort of semi-public in that they are accessible to other members of the religion, and who may translate them or at least will understand themselves. But it's kind of interesting in the discernment models, we've got these reasons that cannot be expressed to others except in sort of vague terms like Jesus wouldn't do this, or from the point of view of my deathbed, this looks like the wrong decision. Okay, can one make use of reasons like that as a legislator or as a voter?
Thank you very much for these questions. I was thinking about this dialogue with other religions when working on another article specifically about discerned justice. In this model, there are some inclusive and exclusive elements. What is inclusive is referring to the signs of time. If we observe what happens in the world, respect for human dignity, for human rights, for the role of women in contemporary world, all the emancipation and the liberation movements, this is something that we can talk with people of different cultures, different worldviews, and also different denominations. We can come to sort of overlapping consensus, and we can feel a sort of consolation, even if we use different names for this spiritual movement. We can all feel for a moment happy from different perspectives, as Jews, Muslims, atheists, Catholic, Protestant people, when we see that something really good happens in the world. The end of war, the end of racial segregation, whatever, then we can come to bridges over cultural and over denominational. However, what is exclusive in this model of discerned justice, it is not only intellectual, it is not like natural theology, like theodicea. It is a combination with spiritual experience. So someone really has to be moved in his or her heart in making the decision. However, let me give you just an example. In our Jesuit high schools and at the Jesuit universities, we do not employ only Catholics and only practicing Catholics. Sometimes we do welcome scholars who come from different cultures and different religions. What is the point? Do they identify with our mission? And this is the discernment process, will be the good colleagues and good workers together with us, even being not Catholic, being Jewish, Muslim, Protestant, and coming from different denominations. But I think it is very, very wide problem, and this will be the point for further discernment and further work, how to make the results of discernment more accessible to other religion. I think what might contribute to this topic is the highly developed interreligious dialogue today and the work of theologians who spend much time and energy to make this dialogue alive. Does it answer your question?
I was actually more wondering about the reasons that cannot be communicated even within one's religion, because different people will have a different because you can just put it into these vague terms that are meaningful to oneself but will not have the same meaning to others. So from the point of view of my deathbed, I see something as the right decision. From the point of view of yours, you may not see it that way.
I agree. I agree. It happens very often that within the same religion, we have, for example, conservative Catholics and liberal Catholics, and sometimes they don't have common language when arguing with each other. However, what is helpful here, in the context of my presentation, the political philosophy can contribute also to inner religion dialogue. For example, Public Reason of John Rawls. It is like looking for common language and common values among people who are divided. Sooner or later, even if the country is 100% of one denomination, people start to get divided under different criterion. Some are more conservative, some are more liberal, some are more pro-European, some are skeptical about European Union, sometimes are pro-ecological, some other are moderate about ecological issues. And sooner or later, we realize that even within our own church, we need sort of overlapping consensus and sort of, let's say, public reasons to talk with each other with respect. So in this case, even if we have difficulties to find the common language in our own church, sometimes I think the proviso of public reason can instruct us, can be the key opening something in us what is closed, what is the problem in our communication, even in our communion. But then discernment, I have no time to present all the rules of the so-called communal discernment. This is another topic. When people gather together, they precisely pick up the topic, they talk about procedure, about the methods, they present all the pros, all the cons in absolute freedom, and they pray, they gather together, and they share until they all agree that we are on the same side, that we are quiet, that we follow the proper path. I think I should end up.
Okay, thank you, Father Dariusz. I have one more question, a very brief answer, please. The question is, I don't understand the concept of the justice you presented. Is it Habermasian, is it Rawlsian, or is it yours? So I guess the question is whether, what is exactly your contribution, where Habermas, where Rawls ends, and where your concept starts?
Okay, brief answer. My very contribution is the deserved justice, because I tried to make the synthesis of Ignatian spirituality, Ignatian pedagogy, Catholic social teaching, and the science of time. And I introduced this new term, the deserved justice. So this is not that I started from zero as Dariusz Dańkowski, but I made this kind of synthesis. So this is my contribution. And Rawls and Habermas are the sources of the concepts when we are talking about public debate. This is for me useful to take from them their ideas and to test deserved justice in public conversation.